Hello and welcome to the Women in Manufacturing webinar hosted by the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. We're here live at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Now, this is the third edition of a Part 4 series of Women in Manufacturing. So my name is Kangathan Njoroge. I will be your moderator for the day. Today's topic is restructuring a resilient business beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have an exciting panel who will give us insights on the topic and some of the things that you have been asking and you have asked on our social media platforms. Now, the topic is close to me because I have seen a lot of people get affected, people and family losing their jobs, others closing down their businesses. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of this, let's talk a bit about Women in Manufacturing program by Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Now, this is a mentorship and networking program that is aimed at increasing participation of women in the manufacturing sector. So a bit of the statistics is women make over 50% of population in Kenya and provide over 85% of labor in agriculture sector. They also own businesses. Women-owned businesses also are at 48% of all SMEs in Kenya, contributing to 20% of Kenya's GDP. But I am not the one to speak about women in manufacturing. We have the chairperson of the Women in Manufacturing program at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, Flora Mutahi. Flora, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. Can you expound more about Women in Manufacturing program here and how they are feeling due to this pandemic?
All right, good morning. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Like you heard, I'm Flora Mutahi, the chairperson of Kenya Women, the chairperson of Women in Manufacturing. Basically, we started this in 2017 when we realized that we started this in 2017 when we realized a lot of women manufacture. In fact, we all know women and our aunties and our mothers who actually would be doing something. I make crisps, I make sweaters, I make. So we realized women actually do manufacture. The problem that we have is women do not necessarily scale because they don't perhaps see it as a career. So it's always a side hustle. So the idea of the whole Women in Manufacturing was to actually have a place where they could network, engage, be mentored by other women who have actually grown large businesses. The corporate women also who have actually made something out of it. Because we've also noticed people work in manufacturing, but when they get out and retire and say, what can I do? They go straight to consultancy. How about if we had them coming into manufacturing? Because we know the importance of manufacturing in the economy. You know, it creates several thousand jobs. And in all sectors of society. So that's really the history behind the Women in Manufacturing.
All right, so why is this webinar important? The 4-part series that the Women in Manufacturing platform has been doing, why is it important for KAM to do this? And why is it important to raise patent issues about women in manufacturing?
Well, the importance, again, would be just the low numbers that we are seeing of women in manufacturing. So if we sort of recognize, and we have a panel here of, people in gender, people in economics, and if we sort of recognize what their issues are and help them think things through, we should be able to help them build their businesses to actually contribute to the 50% that we want women to contribute, based on just the demographics of the population. Yeah. So really to bring to flesh things out, to really bring out and realize, we do realize women have 2 jobs. You have a job in the home, and then you sort of then are expected to contribute in your environment. So if we could sort of help you think things through and thrash things out, then we'd be able to see a better number.
All right, so we've seen the pandemic has caused a bit of a new normal. But before that, what are the issues that have been affecting women in manufacturing?
Women in well, basically, I think the number one reason, if you ask any woman, that is affecting them, they say is access to finance. Which we definitely agree. It is not very easy for a woman to access finance. Yeah.
let's talk about what collaterals the banks are asking for. Does she have, is the title in her name?
Yes.
Has she built? She definitely has not perhaps built the capital. But there are also other silent issues that come in the way, that just by one being a woman, the level of responsibility she's handling, so she tends to feel already getting into a business is insecure. Will I really then put my whole family into this? You know, there's the issue about women start small businesses. They never want to take a big risk, whereas men would start a big business because he wants a big business. So why can't the women do that? And yet they're doing that in corporate. So those are other issues that we've tended to find. I guess today we'll thrash out all the others, but
Yes.
my bigger one for me is also sometimes also just understanding strategy and how to grow, which is why mentorship is a big thing. So we've told the women, come to Kenya Association of Manufacturing. We will link you up with other people who have done it before, women or men, who can actually tell you you can do it. There's also an innate fear. We are very, we want to cross the T's and dot the I's before we understand what is going. I can see you totally agree with that.
Yes.
Before we understand, whereas men are better and bigger risk takers.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean women are not. So it's really just to wash out the obstacles in the way, and we'll definitely see women thriving and growing.
Oh, interesting. Let's look a bit at the statistics that have been rolling out since the started. So the Central Bank of Kenya said that at least 75% of SMEs risk closure by end of June. So this translates to a bit 8 businesses out of 10 risk closure due to lack of funds. Due to coronavirus. So lack of funds has been, and you've already talked about the lack of funds. So he says businesses are on the rocks and would be in a critical state by the end of June. Now, I have not introduced the rest of the team. We have Kwame Owino, the CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thank you so much, Mr. Kwame, for coming in.
Thank you.
Yes, we have Mr. Mushaik Kunyiha, the Vice Chairperson of Kenya Association of Manufacturers, and also the Group Managing Director of Copper K Brands Limited. Thank you very much for coming through. We also have Daisy Amadani, the Executive Director of Crown Trust, and as well Beverly Spencer, the Managing Director of BAT Kenya. Let's start with Kwame. Give us an overview about Kenya's economic landscape right now, and of course, what is going on in the manufacturing sector as we delve in deeper.
Okay. At the beginning of the year, the expectation was that Kenya's growth rate would be 6.2%, which would be quite high, actually, very, very, not just reasonable, but actually quite impressive. Both globally and regionally. Of course, at the end of March, those figures had to be dropped, to be adjusted. They were adjusted to 3%. It's come down to 2.3 or 2.5%. That would be the best case for the rest of this year. So, of course, in that environment, it has implications for business, it has implications for government revenues, and even implications for the kind of jobs that we create. So while we've had a huge unemployment problem in Kenya, for instance, but we usually get more employment when growth is also high. So what that says is that the growth, the possibility that firms would grow and to create new opportunities for employment, government revenues as well, and also investments in other things has been affected. So that's the issue. Now, I think on the whole, government made big calls in March and April regarding trying to manage the coronavirus. Not everybody knew what was here, so of course schools were suspended, a lot of things happened. Many of those calls were the right ones. Unfortunately, because people need to interact socially, and some of that interaction is very, very intense, many people obviously, economic activity had to be slowed down. So the metaphor that economists use was that actually we had to shut down the economy, right, in order to save the patient. It's like taking a patient in a coma to actually get them to heal. And it depends on how much time we actually will take before everything rushes back. The problem is in that interim period before we start to recover, one of the things that happens is just what has been stated before. One, businesses cannot keep forever in a state of, coma and stuff like that. So some businesses have endured hardship, and you can see what has happened. Big businesses all the way down to the smaller ones, including the manufacturing sector. You need your markets to work. You need supplies to come in. But this is not only a problem that affected Kenya, our region, and globally as well. So it doesn't matter if you had supplies or you had orders to satisfy in April, and your supplies were supposed to come in March, but China, South Africa, and all these other places were completely closed down. So it started as a health issue, I think, which is being managed decently, but its effects on the economy will actually endure. That's the unfortunate bit. So we've had people lose jobs at the worst case. In many places, employers have tried to keep people in by cutting wages, asking people to accept wage cuts. And then in other places, you just have farms which have had to completely close down for 3 months or thereabouts. And then the transport sector, one which involves quite a bit of intense social interaction, which is not good given the nature of this virus and the way in which it spreads. So you have to keep people away. So costs have risen as well for that. All these affects manufacturing farms. The demand on the other side is dying. Your supply lines are affected. Your workers cannot work in the same proximity and with the intensity that they did. All these things have to be done all at the same time. So that's the nature of it. And we saw at the end of March, and this wasn't the only problem actually. We had the locust invasion, which was affecting agriculture as well. And then at the same time as government was managing the question of the pandemic, we had floods in other parts of the country. So that again has affected livelihood. So we had all these 4 shocks. I mean, that's why people call it this pandemic in Kenya's case is biblical. It came with a locust invasion with floods. Locust invasion with floods, and then well, I hope we didn't get that far, but that's it. So if you talk about manufacturing, both their supply side, which is basically the ability to supply, and the demand side has been affected because people have lost jobs. So there's this flux which people can't wait to get out of very quickly, and we hope that as soon as that happens, the recovery will happen. Now you could have a quick recovery, or we could have a slow recovery, and that's what we need to make sure that as soon as it's possible for people to go back to work, systems are in place. But the unfortunate thing is that the longer it takes, the more farms at all levels, including manufacturing farms, will degenerate, and that will make it much more difficult for us to spring back.
So does that mean that we need to rethink about reopening the economy very fast? What's your views on that? We've seen the rise of the virus spread in a very short span. Do you think when do you think we should reopen the economy? And after we reopen, how fast do you think we are going to start recovering and seeing companies doing better?
Well, I think the truth is that the reopening of the economy, let me say this, the economy was never closed. Because the biggest part of it is agriculture, and people were farming. There are also other people who, what you did was actually slow it down, and quite a bit. So now the difficulty around that is that it just depends. It's also sector-based. I mean, if you're talking about hospitality and transport, especially global aviation, that's not going to recover for a while. If you talk about manufacturing, for instance, some manufacturing involves food, some of it involves stuff such as furniture, all those other things. The demand for that is going to come in different places. So food, obviously, if the reopening happens, there's supplies, and not many people have lost jobs, that demand will still be there on that side. For other things, of course, if people have lost jobs or income is lower, people will defer. If you're going to make repairs to a house, you need manufacturing stuff, you might defer that for another year or so until everything happens. So parts of it will be slow, and other parts will come in much quicker. But a decision has to be made about when you allow for movement to take place. My view about that is that we have to decide what risks are we prepared to take. Because if it happens, the truth is, infections are going to happen. So what we have to ask ourselves is, do we have sufficient infrastructure available in hospitals? And that was the function of the closures, to buy ourselves time so that there's more preparation. So every county government, for instance, has developed new ICU capacity. We have government employed an extra 5,000 health workers, which have been distributed around. So that was the preparation for which we were buying this time. We are lucky. I think partly for reasons not yet understood, but also because the closure happened too early, that the spread of the virus, it's a lethal virus, no doubt, but the spread and the mortality effect in Kenya has not been as big as what we saw in other parts of Europe or parts of the world. So in that, we're lucky. It gives us time to manage and to hope and cross our fingers that somehow a vaccine develops, because the only way we are going back to business as usual is if a vaccine comes back. So my view is that we should cool down on the schools. Remember, there's 16 million kids in Kenya who go to school. Now, the younger people are not as vulnerable as older people and people with comorbidities or other many conditions. But the truth is, if you're taking 16 million kids to school, interacting in very short spaces, they may not suffer, but the ability to transfer that to other people will mean that this will go up. So my view about it is that if some opening is going to happen, I think we should keep schools closed for a while. I mean, that's not going to make all parents happy, but let's keep schools closed for a while, but people have to go back to work. And if that happens, people understand the safety that has to be, or other safety measures that have to be kept, the sanitation that's required. Of course, we have to put on masks and try as much as possible to have that. Yes, that should happen sooner than later. But the point is, the decision has to be science-led, and it's not an economist's decision about when to open. Actually, the decision is, how far are we in terms of managing spread? If you do that, the economists know how to get us back to working condition. But it's not an economist's call about how we manage the health outcomes.
Not an economist's call. Let's go to Madam Daisy. Now, coming to you, we've seen the government doing a lot of measures in terms of course, making sure that we're testing a lot of people, and apart from that, the president has been trying to, he announced a 3 billion credit facility for SMEs. Do you think the government is doing enough to help SMEs cope with the loss of jobs due to the pandemic?
Thank you. To be fair, I do think that they're trying. And I think that we really should appreciate the effort that is being made. Given that even before COVID, I think it's fair to say that our economy was already struggling. And so post-COVID measures and the efforts that the state, the government and the president have put in are commendable because they are really trying to shore people up. You talked about the statistics that the CBK governor talked of. One of the challenges that SMEs have is that they don't have any cushions. They are already fragile. And any kind of shock just sends them, off the ledge. And I think that is very problematic. And because of the fragile nature of business, there's not many financial institutions that really come to shore them up because they represent too much of a risk. So I think that is something that we need to begin to look at. How do we build resilience with SMEs? But I do think that there are opportunities. And I like the analogy that Kwame has used of putting a patient into a coma so that they can recover. So in essence, while our economy may not be entirely shut down, it is in a sort of coma. But this presents us with an opportunity to be able to plan and to do things differently. And when we look at the strategy that the government is focusing on, the Big Four agenda, there are two key areas that we can look at, even in terms of being able to make things work for women, particularly in agriculture. 85% of the labor is provided by women. 70% of our food sources come from those small-scale farmers. And I've seen, as part of the president's stimulus program, he's also making available some 2 or 3 billion shillings to small-scale farmers. However, When you look at small-scale farming in Kenya, much of it is based on primary goods. We sell the primary good, and there's a lot of loss. And this is where manufacturing can come in, where we value add to be able to save some of that loss. For instance, with the grains, you have at least 40% post-harvest loss. You know, you're talking about the maize, you're talking about beans, but you lose 40% of that. So if we just stop the loss, then we will have more food available. And you must remember that food is key, because we are grappling with many things, but right now, the reason why the government hasn't even risked shutting down the economy completely is because they don't know how they will feed the people if you shut it down completely. So food is a very important component in all this. And for all of us here, you know, you may never need a lawyer, you may never need a doctor. You know, there are people who go through their lives and they don't get sick. But whatever you do, each and every person needs a farmer at some point, because you need food. People must eat. And if you don't eat, you will know. You know, it's not like being sick.
Yeah.
It's not like being sick and you can carry a disease until maybe you go for a checkup and you're told you're 2 months to die.
Yeah.
But if you miss one meal, you will know. So food is very important. And I think that we should focus that since the government is focusing on agriculture and manufacturing. So what are the opportunities in being able to value add and save those post-harvest losses? The 40% on dry grains, 75% of horticultural produce goes to waste. So how about developing a post-harvest value addition strategy, you know, so that then that comes in with manufacturing. Manufacturing will be then the base for that. How do we build skills? That's the other thing. We talk about SMEs. Madam Flora here is a personal friend, and I remember when she started her business. And I am certain that if you were to tell us your story, among the things that has happened as you have grown your business is that you have been trained on several aspects of managing your business. Now, a lot of SMEs don't have that. The training and skills building, money management, business management. Being an entrepreneur is not easy. Being able to run things, sometimes it's almost by default. You know, it's a side hustle that you're trying to bring in money, yet it can grow into something more. So I think that Kenya Association of Manufacturers, and particularly women in manufacturing, must see this as a gap that they can plug. We have the agricultural training centers. I don't think they're working very well, but those can be centers where the small-scale farmers can be trained on, you know, apart from seed, you know, what seed varieties, extension services, because all those things, there are several gaps when we look at the way we approach agriculture in Kenya. We talk about Kenya being an agrarian society. We talk about agriculture being one of the mainstays of our economy. Yet the funding that goes to agriculture is actually quite minimal. Kenya has signed the Maputo Protocol and the Malabo Declaration that requires 10% of GDP funding going to agriculture and 2% to research.
Yes.
That is not happening. So we need to begin to take seriously agriculture because it is, first of all, an opportunity to be able to create employment, to be able to generate more productivity in terms of scaling, you know, up, production and value addition, and coming up with new products. So I think that this is something that we must think about, and we have several women engaged in that. So automatically, you know, while Flora talks about women being risk averse, but one of the things is once you train the women, they are almost a sure bet. Because even if you talk about lenders, they will tell you that women are more faithful. Men may be risk takers, but they're also not very faithful when it comes to meeting their obligations. Women, on the other hand, are. So I think that we can build resilience by looking at a combination of interventions that can be devised. So as we come out of the gate of this COVID crisis, we know what we are stepping up to, and within a short period of time, because there are crops that, you know, you can grow and and have your harvest in a very short period, 2, 3, 4, 6 months, that can begin to generate not just productivity but also income for people. And perhaps the government should also consider.
We want to come back
policy.
to you on that in terms of what you think the government should
Okay.
do.
I'll save it for later then.
Let's go to Mr. Mushai. What do you think are some of the approaches that industries should do and businesses? We've seen one of the things is they've been cutting people leaving, getting people out of work, and two, salary decreases. We've seen technology is also becoming having a big impact on companies. What do you think are some of other strategies that can be done? And is cutting people's jobs good enough to help people stay afloat?
Okay, thanks, Kanyede. I think it's definitely very difficult times for businesses.
Yeah.
And it's different businesses across the spectrum, as we've been told by the other speakers, depending on what area you're in.
Yeah.
But I doubt there is any business that is unaffected just by the nature of the health pandemic and the health crisis. And then now it comes into your actual business. So the one thing that you learn in business school is cash is king. Okay, and the cash has taken up the throne for real, and is sitting on it and reminding people that cash is king. So the challenge has been for many businesses whether they actually have even money to pay. So at some stages, it is not whether you want to pay, it is your ability or willingness to. It's not ability or willingness, it's capability, capacity. The bank account is empty, so there's nothing coming in. There's no line of sight of any cash flows coming in. So that is what I think is driving people to say that, we have to do something about the expenditure that is going out. Now, what our advice is, I think, for all businesses, or what we are trying to push, in line also with our sustainable development goals that we sign up to, and our social and moral responsibility as businesses, is one, people started 2020 with whatever plans we had, whether it was the 6% GDP growth and so on. That's why we're going to grow. So once the virus came in, it's like that plan, you put it aside. That's not going to happen because the world has changed significantly. And it's surprising actually how many people don't see that. The first thing to acknowledge is life has changed. So we're going to have to do something else. Two, we're saying, remember you are going to get out of this. Okay? There's going to be life after this. So this is not the end. There's going to be something after this. So even as you're taking steps now, you need to think about how do we get out of this? You have to have an eye towards that. So one of the areas is also staff, because we know recruiting, maintaining, training staff is not easy. Even though we have a high unemployment number, there is still about skills of the individual businesses, the individual part of the business, and the experience that people have. So you want to keep your people together. You want to keep your people close to you, so that at the end, when this comes out, they will be able to come back and continue your business, grow your business, etc. And there's also a sense of the community that you work with. These are your people. So we don't work together just so that we get our paychecks. We work together because there's a human connection that we have working together. So even as you're taking measures, think about what is going to happen to your people. Will you be able to come out with them? The other side of it is the learning opportunities. And I think it's kind of been alluded to. And we've seen a lot of that happening for businesses. One, you can look at it in innovation. There's a lot of businesses we are seeing now, they've rejigged, people are making sanitizer, face masks. I also saw some of our members who are working on ventilators and so on. So people are able to innovate. How can we start thinking, what are we going to be able to do differently? What you find in a time of crisis like this is things that you had postponed that you will do later, you now have to do them now because you have to. Zoom calls, everybody thought Zoom is a nice idea. We can do video calling, but now we have to video call.
Yeah.
So everybody is on Zoom. Even my mom knows how to use Zoom. So it's this kind of thing is we now understand new technology that was always there, always available, but we can reach to it and start implementing it in our businesses so that we are able to move forward in the new world, whatever that world is going to be. I think another important thing is about partnerships. And that's part of what we are doing here. And I, commend Flora and the CAM team also for women in manufacturing, as well as what we do with KAM, is that you have to work with other people. Because this is the time to start reaching out to other people and hear, what are you doing? How are you handling this? How can we help each other? What are the things that we can do that solve our current problems, the supply chains that we may have or may not have, and what we can do right now. So that partnership, that sense of let's work together, whether it's even at just neighborhood level or at business level, you've got to find people you're working with and you're trying to address the problems of the future that we don't really know what is coming up ahead. Because to some extent, this is just the beginning. We are not really sure what is going to happen. We've gone through the first critical stage, but we don't know how long this is going to run. And so it's important for businesses to build resilience. I think that's what you call it, is resilience.
Yes.
And resilience is your ability to adjust to continuing changes. So those are the kind of systems that you need to put in your business so that you're ready for whatever is going to be coming ahead.
Is this the new normal? Do you think that this is now the new normal?
The question is, what is this?
What is this?
So the new normal is that it is going to be changing. I think what they talk about is a VUCA world. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous.
Wow,
so
VUCA.
it's going to be constantly changing.
Yeah.
But to some extent also what this reveals to us, that it's always been like this. It may not be for everybody, but for some people, it has always been like this. I was talking to some of my friends in the Congo. So if you live in the Eastern Congo, living in crisis is normal. It's not abnormal.
Wow.
There are people in the world who live in crisis all the time. And it's like if you live in Iraq or Afghanistan, right, or Syria, okay, this is how you live. So this, in a sense, has brought the whole world to start seeing how many people live. But it's also the same in terms of, and it happens to us at different times. A loved one, or somebody dies, somebody gets, we had is diagnosed with something serious. So there's always things that happen that disrupt us significantly. Yeah. What has happened now, it has disrupted all of us. Usually there's still somebody stable standing, but now we are all in the disruption phase. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, remember you can send in your questions, commenting on the link below, so that we'll be able to try and answer them during the end of this session, by the end of this session. We're going to go to Ms. Spencer. You work in a global company. What are the global perspectives on initiatives by various multinationals as yours to ensure that there's still business continuity even during the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And it's Mrs. Obatoyimbo.
Oh, okay.
Not
My bad.
Miss Spencer for
Right.
26 years.
Okay. Okay.
So I think, as somebody who's heading up a business that is part of a global organisation, the challenges are very different to the challenges that you would find at more grassroots levels with the small to medium enterprises. So first of all, as a business, we tend to have
sorry about that.
Very comprehensive business contingency planning, and this is something that we're doing all of the time. So it's not just in the event of a specific crisis that could be completely new. It's something that we are looking at in terms of managing the business, the sustainability, managing the cost base, constantly looking at our organisational design to make sure that it's more fit for future rather than a historic structure that perhaps isn't going to take us into the next 5-10 years. So these business contingency plans are all in place, but what we did do in the event of the coronavirus
was to completely revisit those plans. Because, as Machai just said, this affected absolutely everybody. So it wasn't just one part of the business that was impacted by an economic issue or civil unrest. This was all of our businesses all across the world, and we're in several hundred countries across the world. So one of the great things about working for an organisation like BAT is the way that we are connected digitally. So I'm able to talk to people who were impacted ahead of me. So, for example, the team in China or the team in South Korea or the team in Japan, and ask them, okay, so what are the things that you've put in place? How have you managed, to protect jobs, to keep your team safe, but still go about your business? And I think that's what a lot of larger organisations are doing. So they're learning from people that are ahead of us in the curve, and then we're putting similar processes in place. But as a business here, number one objective, protect jobs, first of all. So we've been looking very closely at our cost base here in Kenya. I also look after the rest of East Africa as well. And so our number one objective was to protect jobs. So we have pulled out all of the luxuries that you could think are possible in order to be able to pay our staff. We haven't reduced salaries. People received their bonuses for last year. So we've done everything that we can to try and keep the economy for our staff stable, so that they can continue to work in a positive way going forwards. Then in the workplace, it's to protect them from any issues. So all of the BCPs that we use in BAT, we very quickly purchase quite large stocks of all the kit that is required to keep people safe going forwards. And that was important for us, so that if we keep the factory running to support the manufacturing agenda here in Kenya, everybody on the factory floor is safe.
All right.
So I would say those are the big things, but it's much more difficult for people at grassroots level. It's much more difficult.
Yeah.
So, and I think, if I speak from a personal perspective, I think the government should be focusing very, very specifically on how we get the small to medium enterprises back into full operation, even bigger than before, after all of this, with all of these creative measures that we've now had to utilise, because it's now the new way of working.
Wow. So some of the global perspectives I've had from you, are they able to be adopted in Kenyan companies? Is it something that?
Oh yes, absolutely, for sure. I mean, I'm a proud member of the CAM board, and one of the reasons why I work closely with CAM is I believe that a lot of some of the very sort of structured frameworks that we have within our business, we can share those with other companies here in Kenya in order to get them into a much more sustainable and forward-looking position. We run things called integrated work systems in our factories. I brought the whole of the CAM team round recently just to have a look at exactly what does that mean, what does it do for the business. And these things can be broken down into nice simple buckets, and they can be shared with smaller organisations, small to medium enterprises, and they can take those learnings into their own businesses to give them a much more structured approach, and hopefully offer a more sustainable business going forwards. So definitely.
Definitely. Mr. Kwame, we've had the global perspectives about how globals are doing to maintain business continuity. What do you think Kenyan companies should do to maintain business continuity?
Well, that should perhaps have gone to Mushai and her. But okay, I think to my mind, I'm sure the Kenya Association of Manufacturers is something or some board which allows like some members to share information about what they see and how they're trying to respond to it, and then to filter with one another and discuss, okay, in these circumstances, this is how we are responding and what that means. Because part of a crisis is of this nature, especially for a farm, is also that you're trying things and experimenting, seeing what's working, and then adjusting it as you go along. Because there are no farm answers. If there were farm answers, then I'm sure they'd have fixed it in 1 week.
Yeah.
So part of it is also to allow that, look, you have some management capability, you have management minds, and then you simply come and ask yourselves, what are the risks? Are there new opportunities as well? And there are. So as you've seen, corporations say, fine, the demand side for X doesn't exist, but we are able now to move from beverages to sanitizers, and they do that. So the point is, if you have almost also a global mindset, then you're able to tell what your risks are, and then you respond to them. And as she said as well, if we had to deal with this thing and we are, say, 2 months behind what someone else has done in South Korea or in Japan or China, as it may be, then you actually know what they did and what effect it had. So you can ask yourself, how do we custom fit these to work for us? So a global mind is certainly useful. I think a dialogue with government as well. So basically a dialogue with government to say, and because government is also searching for solutions, it's a shock also on government side in terms of its revenues.
Yes.
And government understands that if corporations don't do well enough, it'll be even more behind in its ability to actually respond, because it needs some of that money to be able to do that. What they can do much better is actually to ask government in terms of the design of the economic stimulus. I saw the 8-point plan that the president talked about 2 weeks ago. And my view is that it's unfocused. I think we are trying too many things with too little money. If I was to be asked, and speaking now as a student of economics, if I was to be asked, I think the Lifeline Fund for small and micro enterprises, these big firms, as you've said, have their own reserves. They're able to call on resources from other places. And they've done a fantastic thing, which is to contain microeconomies by telling their staff, we will not deliver a shock to you so far. So try as much as is possible to keep yourselves alive. But the people who cannot afford that luxury are small and micro farms. And small and micro farms are not kiosks. Small and micro farms are the kind of people who are now cutting off space because they cannot keep their leases for the long term.
Yes.
And that has a ripple effect.
Yeah.
So if a Lifeline Fund was to come right now, it would be extremely useful. Remember, the shock is already here. So nobody is arguing with the past. What we are saying is, as soon as this cloud clears, we want to be able to rush back to our growth potential of the 6%. Because every single month when we are behind that 6% growth trend, as I can tell you, the IES calculated the loss to the economy, the loss, not the total, the loss to the economy in relative terms, 50 billion per month. 50 billion. So the most important thing is just to prepare so that when the cloud passes, this biblical thing passes, the plagues are gone, we are getting back as quickly as possible to close to our 6%. If that happens, then there's sufficient money even now to actually invest in creating that capacity so that everybody is prepared. When the gates open, we are rushing back to what our potential was.
Madam Daisy, you had more input on what other things that the government can do to help and cushion SMEs during this pandemic.
Well, I think Kwame has said, what really
Quite
needs
a
to be
lot,
done. However, I do think that there is a conversation that we must have with government, and it's a serious conversation, and it would do good for a lobby like Kenya Association of Manufacturers to have this difficult conversation with government. And that is about our debts and debt obligations, because our debt obligations are taking too much money out of the economy at a time when we cannot afford it. And we cannot run away from this. And while we understand, the president has been insistent that, Kenya pays its debts. Kenya pays its debts. However, we've seen that Kenya's rating has been taken down. And of course, that affects, the ability to be able to borrow on the international market. However, there are opportunities for government to actually take in. And I think that the government shouldn't be too proud to seek those options. And among those options is some debt relief, whereby you do kind of an exchange. Instead of paying the debt, have the money in the economy to be able to shore up some of the shocks and show up particularly the SMEs that desperately need it. Because when you think that SMEs employ about 14 million, over 14 million people are employed in SMEs. And so if 70% of them go under, you will have a bigger problem on your hands, Yeah. And so I think that these are conversations that we must have, you know, and come up with strategies. And I think I would even want, I'm surprised that Kwame is not weighing in on it, but I know that there is a group of civil society organizations that are working on a debt relief package, talking to lenders to see how do we shore up the country. Because, as Kwame has said, to get back into productivity is not that difficult because people know, you know, businesses know how to work, the SMEs know how to work. They just need to be able to survive this period to be able to work. The other thing I was going to say in relation to the agricultural sector is that the government should consider a policy where we consume 30% of our consumption is what we grow, what we produce, you know, should be there so that we build on having dedicated markets, you know, for the produce, our agricultural produce. But I honestly, despite the cloud that I see also plenty of opportunity. It is not grim, however, we must have a conversation. Remember that when government is paying its debt, I think our debt obligation, the coming financial year 2020-2021, is over 900 billion shillings. And if we are losing per month with the COVID measures, 50 billion out of our economy, job losses and everything, the government's revenue base is already short. So what we're saying is we're taking this money out of the economy, it's not there. Remember, we have a lot of infrastructure degradation and destruction because of the rains. I think we have about 20 counties that are completely submerged in floods. We have the locust invasion. We have quite a few shocks that the government, the country is grappling with. So we need as much money. Now, government's response to not having enough money is to tax us further. That has then the ripple effect of making it more expensive to do business in Kenya, increase the cost of our products, and it just makes everything, the whole environment hostile to production, local production, and all. So this is not a conversation that we can run away from. And we would need Kenya Association of Manufacturers to partner, to be able to actually sit down with the president, because it is the private sector, and the private sector in all its shapes and forms, from big business to small businesses. That is those are the sectors that government will depend on to make that great leap that they're hoping we will make when we come out of this COVID period. Therefore, we must have the conversation.
We must have conversation. Flora, you could also
Building on that.
yes, building on that.
I think also what happened, obviously, supply chains had been, of course, affected. And all of a sudden, when we were looking for our PPEs, we had to look locally. I mean, okay, we didn't have to look locally, but we were forced to look locally. And we delivered. A lot of people, and that's one of the things that Women in Manufacturing actually helped. Fashion Council was here. A lot of SMEs were able to turn their businesses immediately around and actually start doing the masks. Now, government also started giving tenders to these kind of women. And we also helped, I know personally, we helped a lot of women go and get the certification through Kenya Bureau of Standards, because we have relationships with a lot of these government organizations. So that is another way the government can help, is to actually create, to actually do what we call import substitution, where we say anything that can be made in Kenya, we stop using our hard-earned foreign currency and actually do it here. Who will do it? And I liked what the minister was saying. Let's actually carve it out for the SMEs. So SMEs are the ones going to provide this, not the bigger businesses. Give them a cushion and allow them. And we do have the Buy Kenya, Build Kenya that does allow a 15% variation in price based on an imported product. Again, what does that do? Once I start manufacturing something, of course, with economies of scale, I will get better. And I will get bigger. So that is one area that I think learning from CAM, and I heard the minister actually saying it, of health, saying PPEs we will only buy in Kenya. Who's in the industry? Yes, there's the larger organizations, but SMEs are there.
Yes.
The second thing I also think the government has touched on, but more or less from their point of view, is payments. You know, when I do business in Kenya, how long does it take me to get paid? I'm in the retail business with my Melvin's tea. 60, 90 days. Again, a lot of dominance of power from whoever is actually doing the purchasing. If we were to come out with, that is on the private sector. Government side, you deliver, they'll pay whenever. But you've seen the president has been trying to actually say you've got to pay within this cycle.
Yeah.
I think if we pushed that, we will support all SMEs. Actually all businesses, and the economy will run, because then my coin will turn around several times in a year, as opposed to now when it will turn out 2, 3, and sometimes once in 2 years. So those are the two areas. If you look at the supply side of making sure that people get paid and creating the demand for allowing SMEs and women in manufacturing and stuff to actually be able to supply government, who we know is the largest buyer. Now there is an analogy when we went into AGPO, they say women don't actually come and pick. They actually are not able to supply. But I personally have looked at this AGPO thing, and even when you go to the private parastatals and everything, there's all women, flowers, stationery, they don't actually even help you.
Yeah.
Yes, I do know some women have problems, but I think it's an area that we need to sit down with government and continue to have a conversation around how can women actually be able to take more advantage. Women and youth, we are in the same category. So those are areas that I think are very, 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 very simple.
Yeah.
Another one that women in manufacturing has really supported is exactly what Beverly and I think we were all talking about it, and Mushai, is what do you call it? Well, we call it mentorship. We've actually taken women in manufacturing to Bok gases, where they were taught about Kaizen. We've taken them to Bidco company. I mean, several companies where they actually see and hear and listen to CEOs or their staff members actually holding the hand of the SMEs. Another area where we've supported them is linkages. Everything Beverly does might not have to be done from her factory. She could actually subcontract it. It's called subcontracting to smaller companies. We've tried to be a linkage. We've succeeded in a few, but we're trying to create more of a linkage between the SME and the larger companies. And what tends to happen is a larger company will then hold your hand, help you get your certification up, help you actually create a market, build your standards. And I do know, I think not General Electric, anyway, General Motors actually does this. It subcontracts and it actually steps into the SME and helps you scale up. It actually helps you. It actually helps you scale up, and this is what we want to see more of. We find the textile industry. They say, "Listen, I don't have to do the buttons or the buttonholes or the whatever. Can I get women to do this, or smaller businesses?" So there are a lot of opportunities that we see, and that is the whole idea of this program, where we can actually build.
Okay.
And support SMEs.
Yes, and coming back to you, Mushai, what are other things that you're doing? We've heard that it is important and imperative right now we start speaking with government. How else are you helping the people in manufacturing? Because the private sector needs to work with the government to help cushion the people from being affected by the pandemic.
Yeah, so thanks. We've been engaging with government, and it did not start with COVID. We've engaged with government over a long time, but even this time has been quite intense actually at some periods within different committees, whether it's on the procurement side or even on the policy side on some ideas and so on that we'd be looking at. So I remember especially around when we started going to lockdown and curfews and so on, how would we be able to help businesses, especially essential businesses, continue in manufacturing? And we've been engaging with them. We managed to get our passes, for instance, so that goods could move. And we've had, I guess, issues come up one after another. We had an issue at the port. We now have issues at the borders, the national borders with Uganda and so on. And just putting in our voice there and trying to get things to be smoothed out somewhat so that business can continue engaging. We've also had some engagements on the economic side. We have representation on some of the economic committees that are trying to look at what are the issues and how can we resolve some of the problems that are coming about. So it is engaging. I think, like we talked before, this is the word everybody uses is unprecedented. So there is no game plan. There is no, this is what you're all supposed to do. I think, like Kwame mentioned, if we all knew what to do, it wouldn't be a crisis. Okay, it's a crisis because nobody's certain what is going to happen.
Yeah.
But I think the things that we need to do is to open up the space for debate, and look at the different options. So whether it's like Daisy is mentioning about debt, and you say what can we do around debt? It's a subject that needs to be discussed and then opened up and so on. We talk to government about things like reduction of pay as you earn, and we are glad we got those. We are now talking, we've had the finance bill, we also had the tax amendment bill. There we are engaging again, and unfortunately there is some pushback. I think at some level of government, people want it to be revenue neutral, which means then if it's revenue neutral for government, it has given the economy nothing, because it is revenue neutral. So we're saying, look, we have to look at how do we give support, how do we give encouragement. Some things were kind of reversals, some of the VAT things that we've done. So it's about how do we continue engaging with government, have conversations on what the options are. Thankfully, we have very collaborative or open doors also in government, prepared to listen to what the ideas are and what we are looking at. What are some of the ideas? In fact, they'll ask us, what do you think? How can we resolve this? What can we do with these other areas? I think there will be decisions to come. Like we said, if this is just the beginning and we're expecting challenges to go along, a lot of businesses are taking tough measures and difficult measures within their business, whether it's about payroll, whether it's about the operations. We talked about whether you're cutting down your luxuries. And I think at some stage, government is also going to have to start making those decisions about the government's operations and the government's budgets, so that we say the taxpayers' money that we have. Because again, remember, it's going to shrink. Our tax take is going to shrink as the economy shrinks as well. So government also now needs to start saying, okay, what are we not going to be able to do? What are we going to say now? We have to postpone this for a future time. And it's a conversation we have. And looking especially, as has been highlighted, what will give us more bang for our buck, so to speak. We want to spend money on the things that will have a bigger impact and a quicker impact. Sometimes you spend money on things with it's investment in the classical term. I'm going to get it when I retire. But this is not the time for long-term investment, because people need to live through the crisis to be able to move on. So we continue to engage with government on those things and say, let's build together what we can do. And I think also, I'd say with membership as well, and all sectors, whether it's from the civil society or the think tanks, we need all the ideas we can get at this time, have forums where we can thrash them out and look through them and say, okay, what can be done, and then we can move forward. Obviously, what has also happened to many businesses is it's the opportunity to think the unthinkable. Because you now have to think the unthinkable, because you're stuck in a corner, so you now have to imagine new things that you may not have imagined at that particular time. And that's probably what we need for Kenya. We've been talking for a while about I guess there is the BBI, which has focused a lot on a political BBI, but we probably need one now economically. How are we going to restructure our whole economy? Because even if you think, like we mentioned, manufacturing was not doing very well, even pre-COVID. And we were part of the Big Four agenda. We were trying to grow it up to 15%, because we were now dropping to 7.8, I think, percent of GDP. So there was already need for action. So probably now is a time when you can take even more drastic action, because you're going to need to keep our economy going one way or another. So we need to spend probably more time on that and plan what are we going to be doing in the future. But we do hope CAM will continue engaging in those conversations.
All right, thank you so much. We see some of your questions coming in. We'll be tackling some of the questions coming in a few, but there were some more questions that came before we started this broadcast. So one of them was from Beverly. So what will the ratio of technology to the workforce, what will be the ratio of the technology to the workforce owing to the times that we live in?
I think I probably follow on from what I was speaking about earlier.
Yes.
I think the impact of coronavirus has accelerated our view of how digitalisation can help our business.
Yeah.
Not everybody has the luxury to be able to do this, so I have the benefit of a global network and a team that are at the moment based in 3 or 4 countries around the world that are specifically looking at what we call information digital technology advancement for the business. And it's changing every single day. So I have a raft of applications, Microsoft systems that we can use to connect one another around the world, but also to make the day-to-day much easier. We're totally integrated on an ERP system called SAP. That means that you don't have people banging away on spreadsheets all day. There's a sort of a one source of truth in terms of financial information, sales information, demand information, research. It's all there. So this is huge, yeah? And most major organisations are doing the same things. We're all moving into this new world. What does it mean? It means that people that work for BAT will be doing different things in the future.
Okay.
So at the moment, as I mentioned, we have a system called Integrated Work Systems in the factory. This is something that Procter & Gamble, Unilever, we all use similar systems. This helps us with waste management, with efficiency and effectiveness, driving our operational output, all these kinds of things. There are, I think, 11 measures that we're looking at every single day to see whether they're all moving in the right direction. This means that the machinery's more effective. It means that I don't need to buy newer machinery. It means we can keep the machinery for longer. So there's all sorts of benefits of these kinds of interventions. It also means that we look at our organisational design so that over time there are probably less people running the machines, but we will have people doing more on the digital side. So it's a shift in people's capabilities.
Yes, yeah.
It means that we have to train people to do different things. And it also means that for some people who struggle, that they really have to sort of shift their mindset. I'm maybe not going to be doing this same job for the next 20 years. I need to look at doing something different in this organisation. And I would say that's what everybody should be doing. It's being much more forward-looking, getting IDT to be a real sort of catalyst for change, and then setting a new framework around that. So it's really exciting.
It's exciting, but it's many people are fearing it because of they're thinking that the automation will see them, get layoffs.
Yeah, so that's why I would talk about reskilling.
Yes.
Or what we would also call flex skilling. So you're starting to teach yourself to do other things.
Yeah.
You're throwing yourself into the IDT world so that you're able to do different things in the future, rather than thinking that this means an end to my current job. It means that there is an opportunity for a different job going forwards.
Wow. Another question goes to Mr. Kwame here. We have noted massive layoffs and economic downturns affecting both SMEs and large corporations worldwide. What are the sustainable financing options our business can enjoy to cushion us from such occurrence in case of resurgence?
Sorry. Well, I think as I said, the health side is two things. One thing. You see, this started as a health crisis. In Kenya's case, it wasn't only a health crisis, the locusts and everything. And the economy was already soft. In fact, the 6.2% was questioned quite a bit because we had high growth last year as well, but businesses weren't feeling it, right? Because there were structural problems.
Yeah.
So now the health part, if a vaccine comes up tomorrow, that health part is solved, largely. Of course, it'll have to be distributed, manufactured and distributed, but it will be solved. But the damage that we've had because of having to close is going to probably live with us for a lot longer. So actually the economic damage, in my view, is in a place like Kenya going to be to stay with that for much longer? Of course, if you don't have a second wave.
Yeah.
So that's now that's the reason the economic stimulus that government envisioned, and I'm thinking we're already something like 8 weeks too late, or rather late, should have come in much earlier. And here again, there are no, for a student of economics, there are no new tricks. It's been there. People know when you have an economy that has suffered from a supply shock, a supply side and demand side shock like this, like happened, government needs to walk in and to be able to provide a cushion by saying, look, on the public side, if you can support people, we don't have a welfare system, but we have social protection. That's been going on. And then the other is basically about businesses for the same reasons that have been mentioned. You need to keep businesses close to their workers.
Yeah.
Because if that separation happens, you're going to have to make them actually invest again all the way back from acquiring people, training them, and blah, blah, blah. And that raises their costs and is going to take. So to be able, or rather to prepare the economy springs so that when the door opens, as the cloud lifts, we are able to go back. Government ought to have provided a lifeline. No, there's been an attempt. It's not zero.
Yes.
But if that lifeline was available for businesses to call for it,
Now.
and it needed quickly,
Yeah.
because if a business closes now, then they'd have been able to actually keep, even if it means keeping their workers and borrowing on very easy terms. Banks know their clients. This would have been distributed. We'd have kept a lot more businesses afloat, just so that they can weather the 5-6 months that's required. Canada's done it. The US has done it. And largely, it's the right decision. Now, you can have problems about design or the speed, because speed is required, but basically a lifeline was. We have a problem in Kenya because of prior issues. One of them is that we already were loaded with debt to the hilt. And what this crisis tells us, I think the enduring thing about what this crisis tells us is that a healthy economy is useful when you suffer these biblical plagues. If you have your economy healthy to begin with,
Yes.
then you're able to expand debt. So you can see Germany weathered this very easily. Canada, easily, because even Japan, because you didn't have the burden of debt where you're paying 902 billion this year. This 902 billion could have been used to do that. And my view about it is that if we had some little cushion, an investment of even 6 billion even 10 billion to save the economy from 50 billion loss is entirely reasonable. But the problem is we don't have that scope. I'm talking about the government of Kenya doesn't have that scope because it already borrowed money,
Yes.
built trains, and you now realize trains don't save you when you suffer a plague. So basically that's the issue. But the point I'm trying to make is what needs to be done is clear. We needed some money to cushion the small and micro businesses, especially those based in urban areas, because an average job in Kenya supports 4.5 people from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics.
Yes.
In the first 6 weeks alone, the National Bureau of Statistics says 300,000 jobs were lost. So look at what the knock-on effect in terms of livelihoods. Almost 1.5 billion people from just those 300,000 jobs. So a lifeline fund is necessary. And the good thing about it is it actually pays for itself. So it's not as if you're throwing money away.
Yeah.
It pays for itself.
'Cause
In
it's
6
gonna
months, as you
get
begin
back.
to recover,
Yes.
you can tell that it is. So
Yes.
that's,
Wow. So, Flora, there's a question on Facebook by Cholet. So they're asking, why did it take a crisis for us to do the things that we should have been doing all along?
Interesting question. But I think a crisis, like we said, I think it's Winston Churchill who said, never waste a good crisis.
Yeah.
So it is here. It has happened. Biblically, like he's saying. But I think the most important thing is to actually take stock. You can actually go through a crisis wandering and meandering and come out with nothing. So let us take this opportunity to really stop, slow down and think. Like he said, like Kwame has mentioned, there were structural problems. There were other issues that were going along. Maybe what we can do with history is actually learn from it. But really, the worst thing would be to waste it, and the most important thing would be to learn from it.
The worst thing would be to waste it.
Yes, that would be the worst thing you could do, is to actually waste a good crisis. We can learn. People need to reskill. People need to really think, what is the future going to look like? And one of the best comments I had somebody mention is, so your customer has gone. Have you done a research to find out where your customer has gone? So, for example, people moved away from shopping in retail outlets because we are too many, and they've started shopping in the local outlets. So, have you gone there to find out what is going on? So, it's really, I think it gives you a lot of time to really do a lot of strategic thinking, which we never do. We're always busy with busyness.
Yes.
But now it's time to really sit down, look at what are you doing, what is your market, where is your market, and what is going on, including taking advantage of the opportunities that are actually there. And that is where something like KM would come in to help, bring economists, policy, let's sit down with government and actually see what we could do. So also on the government side, if this does not teach them that, first of all, one of the studies that came out said if internal supply chains are definitely safer than when you're actually opening up your market and buying from outside, this is something that we should definitely, as a country, make a decision on today because of this crisis.
Wow. Interesting conversation. Thank you so much. I want all of you to have 1 minute or 2 to give your parting shot, to tell us what you think is the future post-pandemic, what you think companies should do to cushion themselves, and what your last parting shot about resilience business post-pandemic. We could start with you.
Thank you. Like Flora said, I think that the crisis presents us with an opportunity. And for me, I think that I'm optimistic. One, because Kenyans are resilient in the sense that we sort of like roll with the punches, Kenyans are hardworking, Kenyans are innovative, and we really just need government to step up, help people survive this shock, and plan so that we come out of it stronger. On our part, as Crown Trust, we have actually commissioned a research on women and the economy. And among the things that we will be doing with that paper is also making policy recommendations and looking at areas that the government can invest to make that great leap and involve women in restarting or re-energizing the economy and generating productivity. We hope that we can partner with women in manufacturing and Kenya Association of Manufacturing, because from what we've seen, one of the key focus areas that we're seeing for quick growth is in manufacturing and in the agricultural sector. So we had hoped to be able to launch the research in August at a conference on women and the economy, but that is all dependent on the government measures. However, we do hope that we will be able to do it even as we devise new ways of gathering, social distancing and coming together. I think the president has already set the pace for us. They had a meeting of 212 members of parliament. We saw it can be done. So maybe if we give them a model of how we can do it, we can actually do it and begin to have a conversation. We really do want to work with private sector because of the skills that are available in private sector and possible partnerships to be able to shore up some of the shortfalls that are in the SME sector, to be able to build skills, to build resilience, to capacity build on several areas, So we look forward to it, and I am very optimistic that we will come out of this stronger and better, but we must have honest conversations, and we must not skirt around some of the difficult topics. Let's have those discussions, and let's see what the future holds.
Wow. All right.
Yeah, so I think, like has been said repeatedly, we have a crisis on our hands. It's a big challenge, and I think for most people for many of us is to accept. First, accepting this crisis, understanding the depth of it, and sometimes what in fact, people say is plan for the worst, hope for the best.
Hope for the best.
So, this is not going to be, it's not a flash in the pan. It's going to be probably for quite a while. It's going to mean we have to change quite a bit. So I think that understanding of what is happening is very important, to understand that a lot is changing. Everything is changing. Things we assumed would be there are no longer there. Things we hope for may not. We need to maybe adjust our hopes and plans to a certain extent. So that's one side, which is about, just taking the basic facts and accepting, the brutal facts. It's accepting the brutal facts of where we are. But I think on the other hand, there is a thing of hope and resilience. Is the thing of saying that, this is where I am. What can I do about it? So nobody's, it's not over yet. As long as you're still in the game, you are still there. It is a harder game. It's going to be difficult. It's going to require some changes. But it's now the time to start looking for what are the opportunities, what can I change, how is it going to be going to the future. Like we're saying, you can create new strategies, new opportunities, and new opportunities will continue to arise as we look forward. So it's about just that calm state of mind and starting to look around and say, what can I do? Where can I go? What can I do in the future, even as it starts unfolding itself? And so we're encouraging all our manufacturers, keep at it, keep going. The economy needs you. Your employees need you. Your families need you. So we need to be up and alert and moving forward, even as we wade through the current crisis.
Thank you so much. Beverly.
Yeah, thanks. I think I would just speak first of all from a sort of a bigger manufacturer's perspective. I've been involved with KAM for the last 3 years. And we have been quite ruthless and focused, I think, in our communication to government about competitiveness and what competitiveness can bring to the Kenyan economy. There are probably 4 or 5 big things that we've been talking about consistently for the last 2 to 3 years, some of which includes things like more forward-looking regulations, stable fiscal policies that are more transparent and enable business to thrive, but also government to thrive as well. So this sort of over-taxation and regulatory overreach that we've seen in recent times is really not very helpful. And then other things such as controlling the borders so that the natural demand within Kenya is satisfied by Kenyan manufacturers and not manufacturers from somewhere else who haven't paid their duties on arrival, or it's been punted over the border. So there are those are just 2 of the big things that we've been consistently communicating to government that we believe will be a massive stimulus for manufacturing here in Kenya. So I would ask the government to go back and look at that again. It's only 4 or 5 things, and it's pretty ruthless and focused. From a small to medium enterprise perspective, I support all of the comments that everybody's said today. I again think that there need to be 2 or 3 things that are picked from the agenda that are going to have a significant impact on small to medium enterprise and kickstart the economy and really get some momentum behind manufacturing. And this isn't big manufacturing, this is manufacturing at grassroots level. And hopefully, kickstart as well some of the legacy industries that I think Kenya is famous for. So tea, coffee, flowers. What else would be on that list? I think, and also tourism. I would put that into the pot as well. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful place, and we need to get people back here. So those would be my parting comments. Change is good, and let's look for the opportunities going forwards.
Thank you so much. Mr. Palmer.
The thing about a shock such as this is that one of the things that happens about a shock is that while people claim they want change, they can use a shock such as this to justify something that they always wanted to. So I think what we must be cautious about is that it's true, global supply chains are going to be affected, have been affected. And there's some truth to the fact that to the extent that we can, let's try and supply domestically what is consumed here. But the truth of manufacturing globally is that value chains are global. So basically, you need inputs, intermediate inputs to be able to prepare certain things. So I think that especially at the regional level, the government of Kenya, with support from the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, must remain the level-headed person who says, look, we cannot constrain markets too much, because obviously if everybody adopts the view that let's try and cut out competition from outside, then it becomes zero-sum game, which means nobody will benefit over time. Actually, what it'll do, it'll preserve existing markets, but it will not grow. I think our manufacturing sector in Kenya needs to grow and grow by a huge amount, and this shock. So that's the first. The second is that, as Mushai mentioned, manufacturing was already facing certain constraints. One of them was also not just direct taxes, but levies that are sneaked in. So one of the things that I've noticed as well is that while government says, and precisely, that look, we have reduce some taxes at the pay-as-you-earn level. And government says, which I think is a bit not exactly honest, to simply state that, look, we are giving back manufacturers VAT refunds that we've owed them for 2 years and calling it an economic stimulus. I think we should be called them out. We just have to be honest with ourselves. That's not true. I mean, in fact, that 10 billion is actually insufficient because it's like 10% of what is owed. So hastening that is also important. Just give manufacturers back their money quickly and promptly, and let's do. And the third one is I noticed that through regulations, one of the things that I noticed as I was preparing for today's meeting, I realized that there's so much discretion that the cabinet secretary for the treasury has, for finance has, and one of the things he's done is that playing around once again with excise taxes and everything else, and reintroducing them without formal discussions. Now, of all things, this is not the time to continue to raise costs and hamstring manufacturing firms. So we need to be straight about what we want. I think if manufacturing was just based on let's try and make ourselves regionally competitive, then over the medium term, globally competitive, or at least continentally competitive. You cannot do that and then state it clearly and then come back again to sneak back. So government has to accept that, look, it's a difficult moment, but we need to provide space for firms to compete and to do well and to build, because it's going to be really, really difficult. Because some structural damage is going to take place, and government shouldn't be adding to what the virus has done and what the shocks have been externally. So some of these, I think, they should be called out, and maybe some sobriety should prevail, because sneaking in back these things with excise taxes and a few more levies here and there is not going to help manufacturers. I mean, they're too polite to mention it, frankly, but I think I should. Thanks.
They should mention it. Flora, what is your part in short?
All right, I totally agree with what all my colleagues have said, that I think, number one, predominantly, the government should ensure they give an enabling environment for us to actually kickstart our businesses from this coma that we've sort of that we find ourselves in. And what that will do, then it will allow the businesses to grow. The second thing I think we should do is we should be we should jealously build our supply chain locally. So anything that we can do locally, keep it local. And actually work, that's the second one. The third one is actually work on our competitive advantage, exactly what Beverly has said. What can Kenya do for the outside, and let us actually perfect it and take it to a level where you actually have government marketing. You know, we saw the flowers of hope go out to the UK. We saw Boris Johnson talk about Kenyan tea. That is what the government should be doing to all the countries. Government marketing, to make sure that our competitive advantage actually brings us much needed foreign exchange earning. So those are the three things I think from the government side that we should be doing. On the SME side and on the women in manufacturing and actually local businesses, is just reorganize your business. This is the time to actually really take stock, look at it. We are going to have new business models. It's no hidden secret. There's a lot of webinars going on right now, so I don't think we have an excuse of I can't afford a strategist. It's out there. Rebuild your businesses when the opportunity presents itself, and you'd have to restructure, how you're set up. And again, a lot of learnings are available out there. And so I've said we can do it within our businesses, but I like particularly what Beverly shared today, where she said flex skilling. What can I do for myself? I tend to find a lot of people keep saying the government. Yes, the government will do, but also at the end of the day, take responsibility for growing your own businesses. And this is for also, I must say, for women in manufacturing. Let us scale up our businesses and take them to the next level. There's a lot of people to hold your hand. We as women in manufacturing are one of them. CAM is another one. There are a lot of organizations out there that will help you build your businesses. So I think let's put the responsibility in our hands as much as we work in a communal environment. So if everybody does their bit, I think the sky's the limit.
Wow. Thank you so much. We have such a great panel. Let us all clap our hands for a job well done. And we hope that you will you have the necessary tools now to make sure that your company stays afloat amidst this COVID-19. My name has and will always be Kangaden Njoroge. Thank you so much. Till next time, God bless you. Thank you. Yeah.
All right.
That was lovely, guys.
I was supposed to